if anyone recalls, NCTD was eligible to receive sources of relief funds related to COVID. One of them was the CARES Act, and the second one was the American Rescue Plan Act funds. CARES Act funds were fully exhausted in fiscal year 2022. For American Rescue Plan, we were allocated approximately $65 million, of which we still have a carryover of about $42 million. So for FY24, we have budgeted about $40 million of ARPA funds that will be used for operations. Next slide, please. At the state level, the two revenue sources are the state transit assistance as well as state local repair. Both of these funds are derived mostly from sales tax on gasoline and diesel, as well as vehicle registration and fees. There are two formulas on how these funds are allocated. One of the under section 99313, that is based on population, and 99314, it's based on revenues. For this coming fiscal year, NCTD is anticipated to receive about $14 million of STA and about $2 million of SGR. These payments are estimated by the State Controller's Office, and they are estimates. So meaning that there is no certainty whether or not we will get these amounts. They make their best estimates based on their current economic data. We have seen years where the revenues actually are higher, but we also seen years when the revenues get adjusted lower. For the most part, it's around this amount, but again, it all depends on whether or not, on the collections on sales tax on gasoline, and that will be our final allocation. Next slide, please. And finally, the two major sources of revenue for the district are really derived from sales taxes. One of them is the Transportation Development Act. It's called a TDA. The TDA, the county auditor develops the apportionments in consultation with SANDAG. That is a statewide sales tax. For this coming fiscal year, NCD is anticipated to receive about $56 million. Then the other component from sales tax is Transnet. Transnet is a sales tax just only applicable to the San Diego region. For this coming fiscal year, we anticipate that we'll get about $19 million. The allocation for TDA and Transnet is shared between NCTD and MTS. It's based on the population data as of January of 2022. And then for this coming fiscal year, we will get 29% of the total allocation for the San Diego region. And then also within Transnet, there is a different kind of pot of money. It's called Transnet 8.1. The Transnet 8.1 is funding that's only eligible for certain services, expanded services that occurred after the extension ordinance was passed. The only service currently eligible for NCTD to receive this funding is from the Coastal Expanded Service that started back in October 2021. For this coming fiscal year, we have budgeted to receive, and SANDA has programmed as well in their own budget, $7.4 million for Coastal Expanded Service. Then other sources of revenue for NCTD are fare revenues. Fare revenues are the collections that we get from our passengers from tickets, passes, tapping, pronto. Those revenues are projected based on a service plan. So we determine how much revenues we think we're going to collect based on the different type of riders and what mode of service they'll be riding. Also within our budget, we have included $1.2 million for the Youth Opportunity Pass. Before this slide was presented, the program was supposed to be funded through August, but I believe that within the recently approved program budget from SANDAG, the program is now funded through June of 2024. Other sources that NCTD received also from the revenue standpoint are as the host and are responsible for maintaining the railroad, the San Diego subdivision, which is used heavily it's really part of the Lausanne corridor. We receive reimbursements for maintenance and dispatch from Amtrak, BNSF, as well as Metrolink. So those represent also revenues for the district. And we also receive some credits for our use of renewable natural gas for our bus fleet. So we are eligible to receive both federal and state credits. And then finally, we have some minor other revenues for leases, permits, advertising, etc. So now moving kind of to the expense side, going to point some of the more significant assumptions and costs that are behind our operating budget. The first one is that we will have an increase in staffing levels related to the transition of maintenance away, maintenance of signals, and facility maintenance. Just to kind of give a quick reminder, these services used to be contracted with Alstom under Agreement 16043. So it is meant to be, for the most part, cost neutral. So we are moving from a contracted model to an in-source model. So you may see an increase in the cost of salaries and wages, but you will also see a decrease in the cost of professional services and purchase transportation. Also, within our payroll budget, we have a very conservative approach. Within our policy, we always make our estimates in the worst case scenario. So when we budget for our payroll, we are assuming 100% staffing, as well as the higher level of benefit elections. So you will see in the further slide that when you compare budget to where our actual expenses ended, you will see that we always have budget savings every year. And that's because, again, we assume fully staffing, and I don't think very rare instances an organization can achieve a really 100% staffing. And then also within our budget, we also assume capitalized labor of $2 million. What capitalized labor means is that instead of charging the operating budget, we use capital funds because we have a lot of projects here at NCTD. We run over 100 projects at any given time. So anytime our staff are working in implementing those capital projects, those costs are eligible for capitalization under accounting rules. So they're not part of our operating budget, they're part of our capital budget. So as I mentioned earlier, the agreements with Alstom Bombardier will end effectively this coming June. Those are Agreement 16043 and 16068. 16043 was the one that was currently still providing maintenance away and maintenance signal services, and 16068 is the one that was providing the facilities maintenance. So those will effectively end, and then all those employees will become NCTD employees beginning this late June, as well as NCTD will also be contracting and procuring directly some of those subcontracted services, some of the specialty contracts, as well as procuring the materials. The service that we will continue contracting out will be the one with MV under Agreement 17033. MV is the contractor that provides the bus operations and maintenance services for Breeze, Lift, and Flex. We have added some positions under the contract to support performance improvement. And there's also within the contract terms, consumer price index adjustment that's done every year. That CPI cannot exceed 3%. As everyone knows, inflation has been far higher than 3%, but based on contractual terms, we are going to be increasing that contract by 3%. Some of the wages within the contract, however, for the most part, those for bus operators and servicers and mechanics, those are based on collective bargaining agreements, and they may not be capped at that 3%. For this coming year, the good news is that our liability insurance costs are fairly stable. So we think that we're going to be pretty close to where we were in FY23, which is good news given that in the 2 prior years we had seen significant increases. So our anticipation is that there's been some stabilization of the insurance market. Then from the one of the largest expense as well for NCTD is related to fuel. We use diesel to fuel our coaster and sprinter service, and we use CNG or renewable natural gas to fuel our Breeze fleet. So we make certain assumptions of where we think those prices are going to be. For our budget for diesel, we develop our budget with the assumption that the price of oil will be at about $90 per barrel. If you kind of monitor the current market trends, as of the first 4 months, the average price of Brent crude was around $82. So we are, I think, pretty much there. And then for CNG, that's the one that we have really seen the largest increase in the last few months. So we have made an assumption of about 83 cents per therm. That's a little bit over 50% where it was last year. And then finally, I know that this is a lot of details and a lot of numbers, but the next 3 slides provides, it's sorted by largest to smallest. The 75% of all our professional services costs are in these tables. As you can see, there are 2 columns. One of them is amount, one time, and total. So the first column is recurring cost, meaning that's a cost that happens every year. And the one-time expense is a cost that will only be budgeted for FY24, and it will not be recurring in future fiscal years. So again, the major costs that we have are those associated with the San Diego Sheriff's contract. We also have technical supports and material management agreements for our Sprinter and Coaster fleet, positive train control, multiple software line licenses, as well as the major one-time costs that we anticipate are going to be coming in the next fiscal year are going to be related to the rail zero emission planning and pilot program support, as well as some legal costs. So we can, So again, more expenses. So the total of these professional services, I think it's in the next slide. Yes, about $40 million is illustrated in this table. That's about 75% of our total budgeted professional services for this coming fiscal year. So this is kind of the recap of everything that I have explained. It summarizes what we are proposing to be our total revenues and total expenses for the next coming fiscal year. As you can see, we're balanced. So total revenues equal our total expenses. We have budgeted $185 million of total expenditures, with the major categories being on salaries, wages, and benefits, followed by professional services, and then by purchase transportation. So like I mentioned earlier, $40 million of those professional services are part of that $55 million that you see in there. And the $47 million of purchase transportation are, for the most part, the ENVI contract, but we also have included in there the Sorrento Valley Coastal Connection, as well as some of the pilot programs with Uber and Lyft. So this, again, a pie chart of our total revenues. As you can see, from a revenue standpoint, between TDA, Transnet, federal funds, as well as state funds, they make up more than 75% of our total revenues for the district. And then here, again, our total operating expenses between purchase transportation, professional services, salaries and wages, and materials and supplies, which is fuel, that makes up close to 90% of our total expenses. So like I mentioned earlier, this table summarizes for the last 6 years of how NCTD has compared their actual to the budget. So the first line item are the amounts that were approved by the board to be the total budget for that fiscal year. The second line is the amounts that we actually ended up spending. And the third row is whether or not we're under budget or over budget. As you can see, every year since the last 6 fiscal years, we have been significantly under budget. For FY22, we had savings of about, I wouldn't call it savings, what I'm gonna say is we're under budget by $13 million. And for this coming year, we anticipate that we are going to be a little bit over $20 million under budget. And then if we don't really materialize all our expenses, the good news is that we will have more American Rescue Plan Act funds really to carry over. Like I mentioned earlier, we have budgeted about $40 million for American Rescue Plan, but if our budget comes lower than that, we'll have more carryover for FY25, which will be, again, in the positive, but we're still balanced. So any additional source of revenue, we typically program those for capital projects. And then, previous slide. And then finally, the board approved our proposed capital improvement program back in January. The early approval was needed in order for NCTD to be able to program our projects within the SANDAC Regional Transportation Improvement Plan. So we always come back to the board in June to re-ask for reapproval of our CIP. So in this table, we are showing the CIP that was approved back in January by type of project, by project scope, and the amounts that were approved, for the next 5 years. One thing that I do want to note is that only the next coming fiscal year, FY24, is programmed in the RTIP. Everything else after that are estimates. So the amounts can change every year as priorities change, new projects come into place, NCD receives more grants, then the CIP, will change. But the FY24 is the one that we're actually going to be programming those dollars with our different formula funds with the FTA. And then the proposed changes for that CIP that was proposed in January is summarized in this table. As you can see, we are adding close to $10 million in projects for FY24. Most of those projects are going to be around wayfinding as well as the Sprinter overhaul program. So we are going to be using more of our dollars for more projects in this coming fiscal year. And then this 5-year plan is a summary and a recap of our projected revenues and expenses for the next 5 years. As you can see, we are going to be balanced. If you look at that last row called net operating and capital surplus, it's a net of 0 after 5 years. Within the funds allocation, it's illustrated how much we are planning to program for our capital program, how much we're programming for our operating expenses, as well as the on that second row, 13.5, those are future capital needs. That means that we have those funds, but we have not yet decided what projects are going to be using those dollars. And then finally, from NCD has other obligations as well. One of them is related to the CalPERS unfunded pension liability, as well as a Sprinter debt. Those are not included in operating budget. Those are paid from our net assets. The liability for those is already reflected in our books. Those are costs that have already been incurred. So NCTD makes the minimum unfunded liability payments, as well as we make additional payments on that liability with a goal of paying off that much sooner. In our last presentation that we made to our board several months ago, our goal was to be debt-free by 2035, meaning having both a pension and as well as a Sprinter debt fully paid. So the amounts are reflected here. However, for the pension, it's based on a 10-year schedule. So based on this payment schedule, we could potentially pay our debt for our pension much earlier in 2032. And then finally, the next steps are that on May 31st, we'll be releasing our operating budget and capital plan document for public review. We will also be using our classification compensation schedule, a right-of-way cost recovery fee schedule, as well as a service plan. And NCD staff will be back here at the June 15 meeting and holding the public hearing, as well as requesting the board to consider adoption of the operating budget as well as the related documents. That concludes my presentation, and I am available for questions.
Thank you, Yoon. Suhel, are there any public comments on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
Perfect. This is an informational item, but I'm pretty sure you guys might have a question or two. So could I maybe start at the far end of the dais? None? Okay. None? I knew I could count on you.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation and for keeping all our ducks in a row here. I have a question regarding, it was stated that we will expand coaster service. Is that to continue the expansion that we had or on top of the expansion?
It is to continue the expansion that we started in October.
Okay, I got really excited because I thought it was like on top of the previous expansion. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. And then for the low carbon fuel standard, what do we estimate that would be for us, our allocation?
So for, we have budgeted about, there's two credits. One of them is the federal tax credit. The federal tax credit is set to expire this December. So that one is about $400,000. For the between the federal tax credit and the LCFS in FY23, we have received over $1.5 million. But it's really depending on the market because those credits are sold out in the open market, and it's also as more credits come, the value of the credit decreases. So from a budget standpoint, we are very conservative, and we make the assumption that those credits are going to be decrementing and being reduced. But again, we have had far more than we have budgeted. But for this coming year, at least we expect to receive from the federal credit at least $400,000.
Okay, and is that is that constrained to something? Is it, or how does that fit into our budget? What can it pay for?
So the way those credits are calculated is based on how many those terms of CNG are converted to these DGEs. So based on that, it's gallon equivalents of diesel, basically. So based on how much you consume, we get about 50 cents. So again, we project how much natural gas we're going to consume. Then we convert those to DGEs, and then we apply a 50 cents ratio to that. So again, it's just for the fact that we're consuming renewable natural gas that we get those credits. Because 100% of the natural gas that's consumed by NCTD is renewable from renewable sources. That's why we get those credits.
Okay. Okay, and there's more stabilization right now in natural gas prices. What's the difference between, just the standard natural gas and then the renewable natural gas that we have? Is there a difference? Just because it was so crazy in the open market.
So we get the normal, like we call it non-renewable natural gas is not green, but it's extracted from natural gas fields. When you buy renewable natural gas, it comes mostly from dairy farms, like or what's called flash dumps, right? That means that you're not digging into wells or digging into the ground to get renewable natural gas. So it's a pretty complicated process because remember that natural gas are molecules that kind of travel through pipes. It's very hard to say, are we using renewable or are we using natural gas? So the way it works is we have